If it's Tuesday, 'tis the season for making wishes and making lists. And President-elect Donald Trump is writing his day one list as he looks to take immediate action on the border, January 6 pardons, transgender rights, and more. Plus, will the new year bring a new House Speaker? Congressman Mike Johnson's speakership is in peril as House Republicans brace for what will likely be a messy fight to elect their next leader in a tightly divided Congress. An Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says some progress has been made towards reaching a ceasefire and hostage deal as he again takes the stand in his ongoing corruption trial. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamiche Alcindor in Washington, where the countdown is on, and not just to Christmas Day, though NORAD's Santa tracker is up and running, but also to Inauguration Day, as the Trump administration in waiting is making a list and checking it twice for January 20th. Over the weekend, in front of a friendly crowd, the president-elect said his most immediate action will be on the border via executive action.
On my first day back in the Oval Office, I will sign a historic slate of executive orders to close our border to illegal aliens and stop the invasion of our country. And on that same day, we will begin the largest deportation operation in American history, larger even than that of President Dwight D. Eisenhower.
January 20th is shaping up to be a busy day. Earlier this month, Trump confirmed to my colleague, Kristen Welker, that he plans to try ending birthright citizenship on his first day in office. It's a move that would likely be challenged in court because it's protected by the 14th Amendment. He also told Kristen he plans to pardon January 6 rioters. On Sunday, Trump also said that folks should expect action on banning gender-affirming care for minors and transgender officials and individuals serving in the military. Today, he posted on social media that he would direct the government to seek the death penalty for violent criminals following his inauguration. And the Financial Times reports he is looking into removing the U.S. from the World Health Organization. For some of the president-elect's plans beyond day one, he will need to go through Congress. And the House has a countdown of its own to select a new speaker. That election is scheduled for January 3rd. And nothing can get done in Congress until there's a speaker. Political reports, some people around the president-elect say he's unhappy with Speaker Mike Johnson's failure to deliver exactly what Trump wanted in last week's government funding negotiations. And while Trump's power in the conference is not absolute, it does seem certain that he could prevent Johnson from being elected speaker again if Trump chooses to do that. As for Johnson, last week he told us he's still up for the job after the holiday break.
Being Speaker of the House is a challenge in this modern era, but it's a challenge that we accept. It's a great honor to serve in the position. I wouldn't say it's the most fun job in the world all the time, but it's an important one, a hugely consequential moment for the country. Everybody's going to go home and get a little bit of rest, and they're going to come back fully prepared to do the hardest work of their lives, and we look forward to that in January.
And joining me now on set is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. And also with us is NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist. So, Aaron, I want you to take us to January 20th. What do we know about day one of the new Trump administration?
Well, you laid out some of the things that we do expect to see happen fairly quickly after the Trump administration takes over. We heard the president-elect himself say that he expects to have his team, his administration up and fully functional by mid-afternoon on January 20th. He's sworn in at noon, and he expects maybe perhaps before the parades are all over that he'll be able to have his team at work generating some of these executive orders to do things that you talked about here. And you see on your screen, he talked about obviously closing the border. That's something that was a key part of the campaign. And so you could expect that if the paperwork hasn't already been drawn up on that, it's something that will be in short order and could be a part of the day one actions. Obviously, it would take time to see some of these things actually come into fruition on the ground, physically happening. But the executive order goes a long way to President-elect Trump fulfilling the promises that he made on the campaign trail. We know that he'll be taking a look at things like tax cuts and wanting to get that off the ground fairly quickly. We heard him speak as well about signing some executive orders as it relates to who serves in the military and members of the transgender community. So those are all things, promises that have been made, and we can expect, I think, to see this new administration really try to work very quickly to put those things into effect, at least certainly on paper.
And Aaron, we know that the border in particular is a priority for President-elect Trump, but how much can he really do from the White House?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the question here, right? We know, again, the idea of an executive order is something that we all come to understand, and we can expect that those things will happen on the first day or very soon thereafter. How quickly you're able to actually functionalize that at the border, at the southern border in this case, is still a question that's out there. It's something that would involve money and manpower and all these things. And so the question is still remains, how quickly could we start to see some of the changes happen there, and whether there would be challenges in court to some of the things that potentially could come down very quickly from the Trump administration.
And Julie, before we even get to Inauguration Day and Trump enacting his agenda, we have to get to the speakership vote here. So what's Speaker Johnson's path to retaining control of the speakership?
Well, Yamiche, if he loses more than one Republican, he's not going to get the gavel. And that is a pretty key figure for him because he's been operating with this slim majority. Now it's about to get even slimmer. And I keep saying this, but if he actually retains the gavel on January 3rd, I think that's actually going to be the easiest thing he does over the next 2 years. It's why I asked him that question that you played at the top. Does he even want to be speaker? Because of everything we saw that he went through with trying to get that government funding deal across the finish line, having those last-minute demands from President-elect Trump and Elon Musk. He knows he's going to have to operate with those two in his corner. That, again, will they even support him getting the gavel on January 3rd? That's the big question. And we already heard from several Republicans, one de facto who's saying he's not voting for Mike Johnson. So he's in trouble.
Yeah, a lot of key questions there. I also want to play for you something that Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett said over the weekend. Take a listen.
I think ultimately it's going to be decided who President Trump likes, because I believe that will weigh in heavily on the decision-making of that, because currently President Trump works very well with Mike Johnson. They have a great relationship.
So is he right?
Currently is the key operating word here. I would say he's absolutely right that whoever Trump backs will probably get the gavel. The thing that makes the situation very different than with Kevin McCarthy when we saw those 15 rounds of ballots on the House floor is that Trump wants Congress to start working as soon as possible to start doing all of those things that you and Aaron laid out. They have a lot of work to get done. Certainly Trump knows that. He's been working well with Johnson. Johnson's been going to Mar-a-Lago. He's been hanging out with him at MSG. He's been going to UFC fights with him. I mean, this is definitely a speaker who wants to stay on as speaker and wants to be in Trump's good corner. The way that the whole last week played out with the government funding deal, the ultimate one that passed didn't have the debt ceiling attached to it, a demand that Trump made at the 11th hour, Trump hasn't weighed in about that. He sort of stayed silent. So it's really unclear what the president-elect's thinking is, although if he did want to tank Johnson, he would make it very clear publicly.
But if it's not Speaker Mike Johnson, then who's the next possible person for this job?
Well, we reported even before the election that somebody like Jim Jordan, a firebrand from Ohio who sits atop the Judiciary Committee, he's somebody who's lying in wait. He wanted to challenge Johnson for the gavel. My sources told me before the election that if Republicans kept the majority, he probably wouldn't make that kind of challenge to Johnson. But the majority is very slim. And certainly I think he's playing his cards right. He's sort of waiting in the wings. He's not going to go out there and say this publicly. But I think if Johnson fails to secure the vote on the floor, you could see some other guys start to pop up.
And I want to go back to you, Aaron, because we've seen some reporting that President-elect Trump is preparing to remove the United States from the World Health Organization. During the first term, he was very critical of the organization. So what more do we know about those plans, and what kind of impact could that make?
Well, the transition team hasn't said anything publicly about the idea of withdrawing from the World Health Organization, but we do know that in 2020, in fact, President Trump then did withdraw from the World Health Organization, or at least started the process of withdrawing that would have been completed in 2021 in the summer of that year. Of course, President Biden took office in January of 2021 and ended that effort to withdraw from the World Health Organization. But it does stand to reason, and our team has spoken with one official here in D.C. who is a part of the World Health Organization, who said that he's been informed that there is a plan for the United States to withdraw from that organization fairly quickly after the new administration comes in. And this really does raise some concerns. While it does fit in line with what President-elect Trump did last time around, during his administration last time around, it raises concerns about influence in that organization. There is some thinking here in the United States that it is an organization that needs some reforms. At the same time, the belief is that if the U.S. pulls out, instead of pushing for some of those reforms, that it leaves a vacuum and that countries like China would step in to fill that vacuum and that it would have an outsized influence on some of the global health policy decisions that are made within the World Health Organization and the United Nations, Yamiche.
Yeah, well, another question with a lot of questions to go. So, Aaron, Julie, thank you so much. And joining me now is the lawmaker that we just heard from, Tennessee Republican Congressman Tim Burchett. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. Merry Christmas Eve. We played what you said about the speaker vote next month. You said you think that President-elect Trump will ultimately decide who the next speaker will be. But I'm wondering, is that really how it's supposed to work?
Well, Washington, ma'am, you see all these political scientists, and there's a reason they're not in Congress, because it's all just theory, and politics plays into it. And Donald J. Trump is the biggest dog in the pound right now, and I think he's going to make a huge decision in this, and he will sway a lot of people.
But it's interesting, you yourself have said that you're going to make the decision that you want to make. But do you think that President-elect Trump has absolute control over the House conference to pick a speaker, given that 38 House Republicans, including yourself, just defied him on the debt limit?
No, ma'am. Actually, with the debt limit, we were hoping we'd have some expenditure reduction so we could kind of meet in the middle on that. And as far as that goes, President Trump, I think he understands the Constitution very well, and he understands he's elected president, not emperor. And he's a bargainer and a negotiator. When I raised the speed limit in Tennessee in the state legislature, I think I asked for 85 and I took 70. So he is literally the art of the deal. He gets it.
Yeah. Well, we've seen everyone from President-elect Trump to his son to Elon Musk threaten to primary challenge Republican lawmakers who don't fall in line behind Trump. You haven't even taken your seats yet in the new Congress. Do you see these threats as empty? How worried are you yourself about maybe being primaried if you don't line up with everything that Donald Trump wants you to do?
Well, I'd be lying to you if that wasn't in the back of my mind. But the reality is I represent the hardworking people of East Tennessee, the 2nd Congressional District, and they're the ones who make those decisions for me, I guess you could say. But again, let's look at the reality. What are we going to have, a 3-person majority or a 5-person majority, whatever? A good case of the flu, ma'am, and the Democrats are back in the majority. So I think the reality is that he knows he's going to have to work with us. And good and well, there's not a Democrat out there that will work with President Trump unless they switch parties.
Yeah, well, I also want to point out that in that CNN interview that you said that you want Speaker Johnson to prove that he is serious about cutting spending. We are reporting that there's a handshake agreement, a gentleman's agreement, that Congress will raise the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion and cut $2.5 trillion in spending in a reconciliation package next year. We've seen deals like this in the past, but how much do you trust the conference leadership and your actual colleagues to follow through on this?
Well, as I was quoted before, ma'am, they asked me about the gentleman's agreement, and I said, I've been in Washington 6 years, and there's not very many gentlemen up here. That's worth the paper it's written on, and obviously it wasn't even written on any paper. So I think that answers itself. But I think we're in a bargaining stage in this thing. I think we're $36 trillion in debt. Every 100 days we add another $1 trillion. And we've got to get serious about it. And we've got to get serious about our economy, because we will fall off that cliff. There's a reason that people this Christmas season are paying $600 or more dollars a month just to survive. That's not for anything extravagant. So I think America understands it, and they are currently watching our spending, and as they should. And this bill that we passed, it had, let's see, what was it? $5 billion for submarines. It had $100 million in there for the Coast Guard, money for other military groups. And we just passed the NDAA 2 weeks ago. The National Defense Authorization Act was $6 billion additional dollars, more than was even originally asked for. And they haven't passed their budgets have run over for the last 8 years. So, I just think that we are getting a little bit past our skis on this, and we need to pull back, and America's demanding that.
Yeah. And you talk about, your concern for the national debt. I want to put up some of the various tax cuts Trump floated on the campaign trail. That's a lot of lost revenue over the next decade. Are you worried at all about the national debt going up if President-elect Trump gets his way with all of the things that he wants to do?
Well, I've found that when you give people more of their money back or don't steal more of it in the form of taxation, that they don't stick it under their bed or in a pillow, ma'am. They put it in the bank and the banks loan it back out. We grow the economy that way. I've seen that time and time again. I just don't see cutting working people's taxes as a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. We need to get more of our money home. And I think with DOGE, if we can seriously follow through with that, not just the executive orders, but Congress legitimately gets some guts and starts doing some things that we said we're going to do, not just just shuffling the deck a little bit, but actually doing some things.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about another topic. Yesterday, the House Ethics Committee released its report on Matt Gaetz. You backed his nomination for Attorney General, though Gaetz later withdrew from consideration. Having seen the context of this report now, would you have trusted him to lead the Justice Department?
I haven't read the report, but it's just that, ma'am. It's just an investigation. It's not an indictment. And if you remember, the Biden Justice Department, you can't name me one person in Washington, D.C. or in this country that they hate with incredible vitriol than Matt Gaetz, yet they chose not to pursue prosecution against him. They ruled that that the witnesses that were, I believe, mentioned in this report were not legitimate. So I would say just that, and I would say too, sometimes it's better to leave lying dogs lying, ma'am, because they're sleeping dogs. Let them lie, because I think what you're going to see now is and I'm going to be one of those demanding every report they have to be released. I want to know what hush money was paid out by the taxpayers and what else is going on. And I think it behooves you all in the legacy media to start FOIA-ing those things. Find out how many millions were paid out by very powerful, influential members of Congress.
But just to be quick, Congressman, do you trust the work of the House Ethics Committee? I mean, the chairman's a Republican.
Yes, ma'am, but if you remember, it was leaked by, apparently, we were told by the Democrat ranking member, and there were actually talks of charges being brought up against that person. They're not coming back to Congress, from what I understand, but still, it was just that. It was just an investigation. And when the Justice Department, the most powerful legal entity in the world, in the entire world, decided not to pursue a case against Matt Gaetz, that should tell you something.
That's right, but I should just note that the committee, which is bipartisan and, again, chaired by a Republican, did put out the report. But Congressman Tim Burchett, I really appreciate you coming on this Christmas Eve. I hope you have a really happy holiday season.
Ma'am, I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and all my Jewish friends out there, I hope you all have a wonderful Hanukkah.
Thank you. And coming up, a shocking assassination attempt, one of the most consequential presidential debates in U.S. history, and an unprecedented last-minute change at the top of the Democratic ticket. We're looking back at an extraordinary year in U.S. politics, looking forward to what comes next. But first, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu testified in his corruption trial as ceasefire negotiators work to get a hostage deal across the finish line. We have the latest from Jerusalem. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to the Middle East, where some hope remains that this season of holiday celebration could bring with it an end to some of the region's hostilities. Earlier this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicated that progress was being made towards a deal with Hamas to release hostages held captive in Gaza. But he added that he doesn't know how long it will take. Ceasefire talks are continuing this week in Qatar. Israeli officials say gaps are being closed, but whether a deal can be met is still uncertain. Back in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in a Tel Aviv courtroom for the 5th day of testimony in his corruption trial. NBC News correspondent Ralph Sanchez has the latest from Jerusalem.
Yamiche, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back in court once again as part of his ongoing testimony in this criminal corruption trial. You'll remember he is accused of illegally accepting lavish gifts from businessmen. We're talking champagne, cigars in return for political favors. Prosecutors also say that he changed media regulations to try to get more favorable press coverage from powerful media barons here in Israel. Netanyahu denies those charges. He is currently under direct examination by his own defense attorneys, so this is really his chance to tell his version of the story. And one of the things he has been saying is that when it comes to these media regulations, yes, he signs the changes, but he says he signs thousands of documents every year, that these changes were cleared by Israeli civil servants, by government lawyers. And he is saying the idea that he somehow was deliberately making these changes in pursuit of better media coverage is absurd. Now, what's so striking is Netanyahu is spending hours and hours, several times a week, in this secure courtroom in Tel Aviv as events in the Middle East continue to move extremely quickly. He managed to get out of a day of testimony last week saying that he had national security issues to deal with, and it turned out he was actually inside of Syria with Israeli forces who are occupying a buffer zone and other positions inside Syria since the fall of the Assad regime. Now, the ceasefire, hostage negotiations in Qatar are continuing. Israeli officials say that gaps are being closed, but it remains unclear at this point whether a final deal can be got over the line. And so Netanyahu is really balancing his personal legal problems with these unbelievably high stakes foreign policy and national security issues. I'll send it back to you.
Thanks so much, Raf, for that reporting. And up next, President-elect Trump's reported plans for the World Health Organization and the federal death penalty. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Every election year is momentous, but consider just how historic 2024 has been. There's the criminal trial and conviction of Donald Trump, 2 attempted assassinations of Trump, President Biden dropping out of the election after a disastrous debate with Donald Trump, and the presidential campaign of Vice President Kamala Harris that began in earnest just 107 days before Election Day. NBC News' Kate Snow has more on this year in politics.
It may be the biggest political comeback in modern American history.
This was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time.
Donald Trump heading back to the White House after a year of dramatic highs and lows. The former president locking up the Republican nomination with ease back in March. Then along the way to Election Day, battling 2 federal legal cases and a conviction in New York for falsifying business records in an attempt to cover up a hush money payment.
That is 34 felony counts here, all guilty verdicts.
Trump's supporters undeterred, believing he could best tackle the economy and immigration.
I'm the only one in history who got indicted and my numbers went up.
Initially set for a rematch against President Joe Biden.
I'm still the only person to ever beat Donald Trump.
They made history as the oldest major party presidential candidates ever in an American election, a concern for voters as whispers about Biden's mental fitness grew louder.
The special counsel referred to the president as a, quote, sympathetic, well-meaning, and elderly man with a poor memory.
My memory is fine.
That first debate in June setting off 3 weeks of unprecedented political upheaval.
Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
This night got off to a tough start for President Biden.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
Calls for Biden to end his re-election campaign sidelined by an unthinkable twist.
Take a look at what happened.
The 45th president of the United States, injured but alive.
All of this unfolding with Republicans now gathering to officially nominate Donald Trump at their convention.
With his ear bandaged, the former president accepting the nomination 2 days after the attempt on his life.
I stand before you in this arena only by the grace of Almighty God.
That same week, Biden testing positive for COVID.
News broke of different Democratic leaders calling for the president to step aside.
My fellow Americans,
Days later, the president ending his re-election bid.
I revere this office, but I love my country more.
Endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris, and upending the race with just over 100 days until the election.
We choose freedom.
Harris campaigning on the issues of abortion rights and protecting democracy.
Ours is a fight for the future.
Trump pivoting to his new opponent.
I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black.
A convention coronation in August.
I accept your nomination to be president of the United States of America.
Trump and Harris meeting for the first time in their only debate.
I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else.
The government and Donald Trump certainly should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
The dangers of our nation's divisiveness still on display.
The FBI says there has been another possible attempt on former President Trump's life.
By fall, the critical battleground blitz.
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun.
I did not know that.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within.
Polls suggesting a razor-thin margin, the candidates bringing out big names. Podcast interviews taking center stage, with both Harris and Trump taking to the mics. And on election night,
these aren't the trend lines that Democrats are going to want to see.
A decisive victory.
We are now projecting that the next president of the United States is Donald Trump.
The 45th president of the United States will become the 47th president of the United States.
The electoral map a sea of red. The president-elect sweeping every battleground state.
Trump is overperforming. Harris is underperforming the counties she needs to win.
Trump's win fueled by increased support from women, independents, Latino, and black voters, becoming the first Republican to win the popular vote since 2004.
In New York City, Trump has posted a 15-point gain from the last time around.
The GOP taking total control of Washington, ousting Democrats to secure a 3-seat majority in the Senate and keeping control of the House. An election year like no other, and one we won't soon forget. Kate Snow, NBC News.
And for a look at where politics is going in the new year, I'm joined by Democratic pollster Fernand Armandi and former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo. Thank you both for being here. You're both, of course, NBC News political analysts. So, Carlos, I want to start with you. What will President-elect Donald Trump's first month in office tell us about what to expect for the first year of his presidency?
Well, I think the number one issue, Yamiche, is going to be immigration. That is the one issue where Republicans seem to have a lot of public support. And it's the one issue where I think Republicans are united and will be able to do something together despite having such slim margins in Congress, particularly in the House. So I think the way Trump addresses this issue, whether he makes any major mistakes, if he comes across as too aggressive, too excessive, cruel, it could really set him back. But if they do handle the immigration issue competently in a way that's consistent with what the American people expect, I really think that can give them some momentum as they look into tax reform and other big policy priorities for Trump and Republicans.
Yeah. Now, Fernand, there's also multiple reports that President-elect Trump will seek to pull out of the World Health Organization on day one of his presidency. Now, of course, immigration rightly gets a lot of attention, but there's also this issue of public health because, we're a few years from this COVID pandemic. He threatened during his first administration to pull out of the World Health Organization. Do you think this time will be different?
No, Yamiche, I think we have to take all of Donald Trump's threats now much more seriously than during his first term, precisely because this time around, there will not be the guardrails, even within the Republican Party, even within the Trump administration that existed last time. So whether it's threats to pull out of the World Health Organization, threats to pull out of NATO, threats made in the past week, credible threats to take over Greenland, re-seize the Panama Canal, impose tariffs, debilitating economic tariffs on our neighbors and trading partners in Mexico and Canada. You know, people like to dismiss that as Donald Trump, quote, joking and playing around, or at best a negotiation strategy. I don't think we can do that anymore. I think you have to take, unfortunately, Donald Trump now at his word as he begins what I think will be an imperial presidency that will remake America's image around the world, that will cause a host of problems for our multilateral alliances and allies around the world. I don't expect it to be necessarily good times ahead.
And Carlos, when you think about sort of the times ahead, a priority for Donald Trump is definitely, of course, immigration. He's vowed to sign at least 5 executive orders on mass deportations as soon as he's sworn in. What do you think those executive orders will look like, and what will be their effect?
Well, Yamiche, I think they're going to move to aggressively remove criminal aliens from the country. I think that will have broad public support. And then I do think that congressional Republicans, definitely in the Senate, are going to try to get an immigration package across the finish line with Democrats. And I think that's probably a smart move. I think they'll be able to find a good number of Democrats who will be willing to work with them. Of course, we already know that a lot of Democrats endorsed the Langford-Sinema-Murphy bill this Congress, which is fairly conservative. So I think the way Republicans handle immigration could really set the tone, at least for the first 2 years of the Trump presidency, while Republicans have unified control. If they get it right, that can help them build momentum. If they get it wrong, it could make the rest of these 2 years very difficult, as we've already seen. Some Republicans, both in the Senate and the House, have already demonstrated a willingness to confront Donald Trump, to not meet all of his demands.
Yeah. And as, of course, Donald Trump is making headlines, so is President Biden, even in the last few months here of his presidency. Vernon, President Biden created some controversy by commuting the sentences of federal death row inmates. Today, Donald Trump responded by posting on social media. He said, as soon as I am inaugurated, I will direct the Justice Department to vigorously pursue the death penalty to protect American families and children from violent rapists, murderers, and monsters. We will be a nation of law and order again. Do you think President Biden's decision to grant these commutations will backfire? And if so, how? Since, of course, he's leaving office, maybe that might mean something for the Democrats.
Yeah, Yamiche, I think President Biden's legacy is tinged somewhat, especially on this issue of pardons, simply because of how he handled the pardon with his son, Hunter Biden, which he promised over and over again he would not do. And, you know, as a father, one can understand the reasons, but it doesn't change the impact as president to do such a thing and reverse himself. And in the process, give Donald Trump now the ability to go and point always to the Hunter Biden pardon as justification. Although, having said that, I think this is ground where Trump's rhetoric will find a strong audience with the American public, talking about reinstituting the death penalty to go after violent rapists, murderers. You know, that's going to have, I think, traction with the American people. But I do think Biden's legacy on this subject has been tinged because of his actions over the last period since the election.
Yeah, and Carlos, there was also, of course, last week's chaos on Capitol Hill. So another topic we got to talk about. What do you think that says, this budget funding fight that we saw play out with some Republicans, of course, defying President-elect Trump? What do you think that says about the next 2 years, 4 years, when you think about the new Trump administration?
I think it's going to be more of the same from House Republicans. I mean, this Congress that is coming to a close, Jamise, has been one of the most turbulent, chaotic in history. It was very difficult to elect a speaker for Republicans this Congress. They elected a speaker that lasted about 8 months. And then he was ousted. Of course, that was Kevin McCarthy. Now you have a Speaker Mike Johnson who's getting accused by some Republicans of being traitorous, of kind of doing the same things Kevin McCarthy used to do to get things done. At the end of the day, Republicans are going to continue needing Democrats for big votes, such as a debt ceiling, funding the government, and other major national priorities. So I think it's incumbent upon Donald Trump to try, even though it's not in his nature, to foster some bipartisan cooperation on the Hill, because I think that's really the only way that he's going to be able to move legislation, except for maybe 1 or 2 issues like immigration and tax reform. But that is a big if. I think it's unclear that Republicans will be able to move tax policy without any Democratic support.
And Ferdinand, briefly, Republican dysfunction last week, did it give you any confidence that the GOP will not be able to accomplish at least some of Donald Trump's agenda?
Oh, no. I mean, there will be the big ticket items that I think Trump, through either intimidation or force of his will be able to get across the finish line. I think probably the tax cut and extending some of the existing tax cuts of the Trump administration first go around will have an audience, and I think we'll be able to get done. Having said that, I think there is also an opportunity for Minority Leader Jeffries to use really the only leverage point that Democrats have with unified Republican government, and it is to keep that House caucus together. If he can do that without any splintering of the caucus, then, as Carlos Curbelo says, he might be able to use that for negotiations on bills and votes that come down to a handful of votes, which I anticipate most of these will, especially if they're party line votes.
Yeah, definitely a lot to look at next year as we think about all of that's going on. So, Fernand, Carlos, thank you both for having you coming on Christmas Eve. And after the break, meet the longtime Trump loyalist set to become the nation's top cop as the president-elect eyes an overhaul of the Justice Department. The latest installment of our Meet the Cabinet series is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President-elect Trump will make history when he takes office next month. After becoming the first former U.S. president to be convicted of a crime, Trump's multiple legal battles over this past year played a big part in his campaign for president. NBC News' Vaughn Hilliard has a look back at Trump's legal battles and what they meant for the 2024 race.
For defendant Donald Trump,
Donald J. Trump is guilty.
The fate of the 2024 presidential election could determine both his political and legal future.
They want to put me in jail.
Trump using his own potential imprisonment to rally supporters around his defense.
Our enemies want to take away my freedom because I will never let them take away your freedom.
As a candidate arraigned on criminal charges in New York City, Washington, D.C., Florida, and Atlanta, where a local Fulton County jail formally booked, fingerprinted, and photographed him for a mugshot that Trump capitalized on.
When I did the mugshot in Atlanta, you know that mugshot is #1.
Trump turned it into a symbol of his fight for freedom, using it for merchandise and fundraising.
Every time the radical left Democrats, Marxists, communists, and fascists indict me, I consider it a great badge of honor.
In 2023, the indictments coming in rapid succession.
I got arrested 4 times in the last... It's almost like I wake up in the morning, do you think they'll arrest me today? I never got arrested before.
Some of Trump's primary opponents trying to benefit themselves from the cases.
We can't keep living with indictments and court cases and vengeance of the past. We've got to start going forward.
That conduct is indefensible, in my view.
But instead, as Trump made his way to New York to face criminal charges for falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and influence the 2016 presidential election, his narrow lead in the GOP primary began expanding.
It distorted the primary, just crowded out, I think, so much other stuff.
Special counsel Jack Smith brought 2 cases against Trump in D.C., charging him over his efforts to overturn his 2020 election loss, and another for refusing to turn over classified documents and allegedly trying to hide them from the FBI, leading to federal agents executing a search warrant on his Florida estate.
They raided my house in Florida, Mar-a-Lago. No notice, no nothing. They raided it.
In a separate civil case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, a New York judge found Trump and his family company to have engaged in repeated financial fraud, fining him $460 million.
Donald Trump may have authored the art of the deal, but he perfected the art of the steal.
A jury in New York also finding him liable for sexually abusing E. Jean Carroll and then defaming her.
He's nothing. We don't need to be afraid of him.
Another jury, months later, then ordering Trump to pay Carroll more than $80 million after the judge overseeing the litigation determined that he had defamed her again. As Trump called the prosecutions and lawsuits politically targeted, the justice system continued to churn.
It shouldn't be allowed to happen, so I'll stay around here.
Major witnesses taking the stand in the hush money trial, Stormy Daniels, Michael Cohen, the publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, and his former White House close aide, Hope Hicks. Meanwhile, his political allies courting public opinion.
The judicial system in our country has been weaponized against President Trump.
They're not prosecuting President Trump, they're persecuting him.
After 7 weeks, the jury unanimously found him guilty on all 34 felony counts. The judge scheduling a sentencing date for after the election, raising the stakes of America's decision.
We are now projecting that the next president of the United States is Donald Trump.
This was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time.
And with the result, concerns about immunity from prosecution and the ability and precedent of imposing a sentence on a sitting president, leading special counsel Jack Smith to drop his 2 cases. Federal judges then agreeing to toss the indictments out, his Fulton County case indefinitely on hold, and the judge in his New York trial now deciding whether to toss the verdict against Trump out altogether or suspend his sentencing date until he leaves office in 2029.
And now that Fulton County case indefinitely on hold as the Georgia courts determine whether District Attorney Fani Willis should be disqualified from prosecuting the case against Donald Trump and the other defendants because of the relationship that she had with her one-time special prosecutor, the lead prosecutor on the case, Nathan Wade.
Thanks so much, Vaughn Hilliard, for that report. I want to turn now to someone who is set to be a key figure when it comes to the legal issues in the Trump administration. It's his pick for Attorney General Pam Bondi. Trump suggested to Christian Walker that he plans to give the former Florida Attorney General a lot of leeway in terms of how she runs the Department of Justice and whether she prosecutes his perceived political enemies. That brings us to the next installment of our series, Meet the Cabinet. Here's NBC News campaign embed, Alex Tabet.
Pam Bondi has been like a rocket ship. She's very popular and very good and very fair.
President-elect Donald Trump has chosen former Florida AG Pam Bondi as his pick for Attorney General. Born in Tampa, Bondi studied criminal justice at the University of Florida and got her law degree from Stetson University. Then she'd spent more than 18 years as a public prosecutor before diving into politics. And in 2010, Bondi was elected as Florida's first female Attorney General.
The next Attorney General of Florida, Pam Bondi.
As Florida's AG, Bondi was a key figure in the fight against Obamacare. She led a failed effort to overturn the Affordable Care Act, which went before the Supreme Court in 2012.
We still believe it's unconstitutional. It is such an overreach by the federal government.
She courted controversy, fighting and failing to keep Florida's constitutional ban on same-sex marriage.
When I was sworn in as Attorney General, I put my hand on a Bible, I raised the other hand, and I swore to uphold the Constitution of the state of Florida.
And for opting not to join New York's Attorney General in an investigation into Trump University over allegations of fraud.
At Trump University, we teach success. That's what it's all about.
That ultimately led to a $25 million settlement for Trump University students. A Trump loyalist from the start, Bondi spoke at the 2016 Republican National Convention, attacking Hillary Clinton.
Lock her up. I love that.
She was on Trump's transition team in 2016 as speculation swirled she might be joining his first cabinet.
Well, I'm very happy being Attorney General of the state of Florida right now.
She served as the chair of the America First Policy Institute, a conservative think tank that laid the groundwork for a second Trump administration, and is one of Trump's defense lawyers during his first impeachment.
This is all about one phone call that President Trump had with President Zelensky. The transcript was released, and they have not charged. I've got to be really clear here. They have not charged the president with any crime.
Bondi was among a group of Republicans who appeared at a Manhattan courthouse in solidarity with Trump during his hush money trial.
I've never seen anything like this. A judge is supposed to be a neutral arbiter of facts.
If confirmed, one of the big questions surrounding Bondi is, will she seek retribution for those who investigated and prosecuted President-elect Trump?
The Department of Justice, the prosecutors will be prosecuted, the bad ones. The investigators will be investigated.
Something Trump himself says he won't be directing her to do.
Pam Bondi talks about investigating the investigators. Do you want her to investigate Jack Smith?
I want her to do what she wants to do.
Do you want to see Jack Smith investigated?
Well, I think he's very corrupt, but I want her to do whatever she has to do.
Are you going to direct her to prosecute?
I'm not.
After the 2020 election, Bondi was one of the loudest Trump allies in echoing the president-elect's baseless claims of a stolen election. That might be something Democrats bring up during Bondi's confirmation hearing.
Certainly a key figure to watch. So thank you so much, Alex, for that reporting. And we'll be back with more Meet the Press now and a look back at the people we lost in 2024. Welcome back. Before we go today, we want to take a moment to remember some of the iconic people in politics, culture, and the media whom we lost this year.
This is a day for every American, including those of us who are politicians, to drop the labels. We're not Republicans, we're not Democrats, we're Americans.
The overwhelming evidence in the case that we tried is that sexual orientation is something that's an immutable characteristic of an individual.
We sought justice because equal pay for equal work is an American value.
You cannot be afraid, and you cannot be worried about who does and who doesn't like what you do, because there's always somebody's not going to like it. If nobody doesn't like it, something's wrong with it. It's truly been 41 marvelous years.
Do you have one memory of Meet the Press that you're going to take with you?
I think it's mainly the people that I've worked with behind the scenes as well as on front. The people are what count always.
May their souls rest in peace. And we'll be back next week with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. Kristen will have a special Meet the Moment edition of the show featuring interviews with Ruby Bridges, Michael Phelps, Sue Bird, and Megan Rapinoe. And all of us with the Meet the Press family wish you and yours a very happy and healthy new year.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.